In our gospel reading for today, Jesus had some pretty tough words that help us to realize that following Jesus is a real commitment and requires of us sacrifice and participation. If we are under the impression that by choosing a life of following Jesus and calling ourselves a Christian, we have chosen the easy way out and the easy way through life, we are mistaken. Following Jesus is not an easy road. It is a good road, but it is not an easy road. Our faith requires constant attention from us, constant devotion. It requires our greatest priority. If we don't prioritize our faith, if we don't set our own priorities in life, priorities will be made for us. And we'll find ourselves coasting along different paths and different roads that may not lead us in the path we wanted to go. There are plenty of other things in our culture and our society vying for our attention, vying for our priorities. Commercials are trying to get us pulled in different directions all the time. I think when we watch the news, they certainly are calling our attention and calling our priorities in other ways as well. Sometimes our families are calling our priorities in other ways, or our work, or our neighborhood obligations. Sometimes even our commitments to clubs or sports is trying to pull our attention and our priorities as well. And so unless we make our faith a priority, sometimes it gets put on the back burner. Because faith is important, but it's not always urgent. Our faith does not always make it on our to-do list. And so I'd like to take this time to kind of divert from the sermon model and do a little mini class on creating a rule of life. Creating a rule of life is an ancient practice, but I think it's associated most with Benedict, who really kind of revitalized monastic life and had his folks develop a rule of life that sought balance between work and play and study and prayer, that emphasized humility and patience and obedience. And so I'd like to talk about what it might look like for us to begin to shape our own rule of life, so that we can put some parameters and some goals around living out our faith. And so I'm going to ask John to help hand out some of these papers. Hey, Will and Brandon and Shelley, could you guys help hand out the papers too, please?
Yeah.
We used to call those dittos, but I don't think we call them dittos anymore. You know what I'm talking about, though. So over this summer, we have been using this image of a tree. We've been talking about this from time to time. And I'm going to go over it for those of you who weren't here when we talked about the tree. We like to think about this as an image for the spiritual life, because a tree, when it's growing well, is balanced between what is underground and what is above ground. The roots provide structural integrity for the tree, and they also reach out and grab onto nutrients in the soil. And that, in turn, supports the tree that lives above ground, with the branches and the leaves reaching out for the sunlight and turning that into fuel for the tree. And so a well-balanced tree has both deep roots and tall branches, and they're balanced. And we also like to think of our spiritual life as being balanced as well, between those parts that are private in our lives that other people do not see, and the parts of our faith that reach out into the world, those things that can be seen. So things that are roots in our faith, things that are unseen, might be our personal private prayer, whether it's, oh God, help me get through this day, or having a prayer list for our friends and families and loved ones who are in crisis, who are sick, who are struggling. The roots can be our giving to church, our monetary giving to church and to charity. That happens below ground. That happens without fanfare. That happens without other people seeing it. I never see during the offertory people announcing, here's my $100 this week. Please we kind of shy away from that. People don't announce how much the automatic debit kind of sucks out of their account every month they go to church. That's a quiet, underground way to give and to support our faith. The branches have to do with reaching out in service, in ministry, by acts of kindness and generosity, by sharing our faith, inviting others to church, praying for other people out loud. So when we think about a rule of life, let's think about imitating the tree and its balance between things that are seen out in the open and things that are not seen, these kind of foundational practices. One thing that I find helpful about creating a rule of life is to put some kind of time associated with our spiritual practices. So instead of saying, well, I'm going to pray, that's great, but we're more apt to stick to it if we put a time to it. I'm going to pray every day in the morning, or I'm going to pray every day at bedtime. Or maybe you want to pray in the office of morning prayer once a week. And you put a time to it. I'm going to do this once a week. I'm going to do this on Wednesday morning, whatever it's going to be. It's helpful to set a time, because if you think, I'm going to do that sometime, it gets to be like all those other things we do in life sometime. Like weeding the garden, or cleaning the gutter, or cleaning out that tube that goes to the dryer. I don't even know, but I'm pretty sure that needs to happen. Things, if we don't have a time associated, they can just be put off. And so I've got suggestions here for the top of the tree and for the roots of the tree. Daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly for the top and for the roots. So what are things that we can commit to do for our faith daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly? And if you really like this time idea and you want to put another line that says quarterly or biennially or however you want to work it, that's fine. This is just a suggestion and a starting place. And we have some down here for the roots as well. And so I have some suggestions on the back of ways that we can fill in. Now this is by no means an exhaustive list. This was just as many as I could fit on the page and still have a reasonable size font. This is going to depend on you, your personality, your gifts, and your life. One thing you might want to consider doing that's kind of a root activity is reading a spiritual book. For some people, reading a spiritual book weekly is a great idea. There's not so many of those, but maybe monthly is a good idea for some. For some people, maybe reading a spiritual book yearly is a good thing to commit to. Maybe we can say the Lord's Prayer daily. And if you commit to that, try to put a time to it. I'm going to say the Lord's Prayer every day when I commute to work. Or I'm going to say the Lord's Prayer every day when I brush my teeth. If we have some kind of time set, it helps us to stick to it a little bit more. There's volunteering at a church fundraising event, donating blood. Perhaps you have a practice of saying grace before meals, but you'd like to do that more often. I know with my family, anytime we sit down at the dining table or at the picnic table outside, we say grace. But if it's movie night and we've got pizza night and we're eating in front of the TV, we seem to forget. So that's something that we can commit to doing as a family. Maybe we'll say grace every single night, no matter where we're eating dinner. That's a kind of thing that could be an additional spiritual practice. Maybe you do that anyway, so maybe you want to add grace to your breakfast too, or your lunch. There's prayer offices, there's prayer services in our prayer book that you can use throughout the day. There's the daily devotions for individuals and families, which is wonderful. There's the Office of Compline, which is a bedtime prayer. And if you don't have a copy of the prayer book at home and you really like one, there are some for free out there on top of the coat rack. Every house should have one. and use it. There are several other things here we can do, like offer to cook an open table meal. That's our free community meal. Or offer to serve at an open table meal. Invite someone from the church into your home for hospitality and building relationship. Another idea is if you are not someone who normally comes to coffee hour, maybe that's something you'd like to commit to monthly. I'll go to coffee hour monthly. And this is not just about coffee and treats. Coffee hour is one of the places in our church where we build relationships, where we connect with one another, where we listen to each other's joys and challenges, what we're grateful for, what we're struggling with, and that's how we are Christians together on this journey. So maybe if coffee hour is not your thing, maybe once a month you'll say, okay, I'll show up at coffee hour, have a conversation before I go home. But the whole idea is to come up with a rule of life that works for you and your situation. My invitation is to balance the roots, those things which are unseen and unnoticed by others, and the branches, those things that show out in the world, because that's a balanced spiritual life. An invitation, if you would like to, if you're going to fill this out, my invitation is to share this with someone else in the parish. Because the more we're accountable to one another, the more likely we are to stick with it. Like if I told you guys I'm giving up coffee, and I said that publicly, or I said that to other people, I couldn't very well go into coffee hour with a cup of coffee, right? Because you'd be looking, you'd be holding me accountable. So if we share this with someone else, we're more likely to stick with it. I'm happy to work with you on this. If you want some ideas, I'm happy to work with you on this. If you want to share your tree and your beginnings of your rule of life with me, I'm happy to hear those and look at those. A couple pieces of advice. And these kind of fall at two different ends of the spectrum. Over here is the more loosey-goosey end of the spectrum. And for that end of the spectrum, I will say, please, when you write your rule of life, you don't have to say, I'm going to try to pray every day, or I'll think about praying every day. If you give yourself an out, it's going to happen. So you can say, I commit to. So if you can kind of encourage yourself to use more emphatic language, we have more of a chance of sticking with our plan. I'll try to avoid coffee, unless I get tempted. So we try not to use that language, that passive language. And then over here, for the more serious among you, the more earnest, I will say, please, if you make yourself a rule of life, and for some reason you don't stick with it 100%, you need to give yourself a break and know that God still loves you. This is a rule of life. This is not, constitutional law. This is a rule of life for us to live into. It can be changed whenever you and God decide it needs to be changed. It can be lived into however you and God decide to live into it. So I would say be, not strict, but be steady and earnest with yourself, but also forgiving and flexible as well. Amen.